Hey Internet, welcome to Worldview Everlasting, your favorite YouTube addiction. And on this week's episode, a question following up on our Heroes of the Symbol Bible Study of the Old Testament series that we've been posting on Mondays regarding I'll admit it is out of left field and not according to the normal tradition of translation. Understanding of Jacob at the Jabbok River. Great story though, and it's all about God's grace for you. Stick around. But first, it's time for your Issues Etc. question of the week. Dear WeTV, our new part-time vacancy pastor has shared with our church leadership that God has consistently laid on his heart a vision for his and our congregation to work together in missions, specifically telling him to form missional communities that go out to evangelize, baptize, and disciple people without the expectation that they would ever go to a church. How should we respond to this pastor's directive from God? Run. Now, seriously, I can't speak to the particulars of your question, and maybe, there's an outside chance you're misrepresenting what he's saying. The thing is, what he's saying is such a consistent line of propaganda that's been kind of like coming down the pipe from the fascist church growth movement that, there's just almost no way that you can be misrepresenting what he's saying. These are verbatim the words that they tell you must say to mold the fasci, the group, into the mind of the pastor who is the visionary leader from God, i.e. Führer. This idea that God gives pastors, i.e. leaders, visions is a massive problem and a horrible twisting of scripture. So Chris Roseborough is on Issues Etc. discussing that very topic in the link below. He will explain how this idea came into the church and precisely why it's dangerous. Check it out.
Email.
Here we go. Pastor Fisk, in your recent Heroes of the Symbol video, your exegesis of Jacob's wrestling with God seems much more in line with the article of justification by grace than that provided in English translations of the Bible.
Yep.
Would you mind discussing both of these interpretations at greater length? Sure, I'd be glad to. Now, for those of you who've missed out, you could probably check it out in the links below, but the short end of the story is that Jacob, having fled from Esau after stealing his birthright, is at long last now a rich man and married to two women, returning to his home, and he camps at the Jabbok River. It's a fording place for the Jordan in general, and he knows that Esau is coming his way with all sorts of armed men, and there's some interesting things that happen. Primarily and most importantly is he's going to get a new name from God on this night. His name is no longer going to be Jacob, which means heel grabber or deceiver, but instead his name is going to be Israel, which means some combination of the words God and fight. Now, the question is it God fights for you? Is it you fight against God? Is it both? Well, it kind of has to do with how you read the text. I never would have understood any of this if I hadn't been given it as a very specific assignment at seminary to study in the Hebrew, and it blew my mind that as I read the text, which had always seemed to me a little bit sort of anthropocentric, it's all about how Jacob decides to be strong enough to win God over, very Pelagian, right? Very Arminian, very salvation and faith is in the will kind of thing. I was like, wow, that's kind of not what we believe, but it's Old Testament, it's cloudy, it's dim, okay, sure, fine. But it struck me that it wasn't even that clear in the text itself. Because, as Hebrew is wont to do, there is a string of run-on sentences that each begin with the word wah. It's a wow, it's a single letter that can mean and, it can mean but, it can be a transition such as then or so. It's kind of a universal run-on sentence machine, which is just the way that Hebrew history wrote itself. And then you have a string of pronouns so that nobody's name is used, at least not very regularly, through these he said, he did, him to this, and him and do this, and him do that. And well, which one's which, and how do we know which is which? And if we read it the way that the English has translated it, it sure makes it look like Jacob is exercising his will to power to win God over, but that's gotta be read into the text, it's not just there obviously. And if you put the commas in a few different places, which there aren't any commas in the Hebrew, guess what? It can all be about justification by grace. And so it struck me, well, maybe we've just been translating it wrong. But I'm going to say, when a guy is out on a limb, any pastor's out on a limb, challenging the history of translation, he certainly is challenging the history of translation. It should be tread lightly here, right? I'm not saying thus saith the Lord. I am saying that to read the original text in this manner is more in line with what we know for certain the New Testament says about how you're going to be justified on the last day. So let me see if I can break down why I think what I think in this manner, nowses and whatnot.
Do or do not. There is no try.
So Jacob's not exactly been the greatest guy up to this point in his life. He's pretty much been faithless at almost every turn. I mean, the closest that comes is when he sees Jacob's ladder, he kind of knows God is with him. But other than that, he's lived up to his name of being the deceiver, even to running into and stealing from his father-in-law Laban, who, to be fair, had not treated him well, but eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, not exactly turn the other cheek, right? Well, he's no better now. He knows that Esau's coming at him with this gigantic, enormous army, right? So what does he do? Well, he sends all of his stuff to one side of the river, including his wives and his children, the side of the river closest to the armed men, and he goes by himself to the other side of the river to sleep the night away. I mean, it's kind of like, dude, you're not really being the heroic sacrifice right now. You know what I'm saying? Now, already at verse 22, where it says this, the pronouns are in action. It says that he arose and took his 2 wives and sent them across the river. It doesn't say that Jacob did it. It says that he did it. Although in your English translation, at times it'll say Jacob because, well, it's clearly Jacob and it makes it easier to read. No problem with translating things that way. Verse 23, he, which is talking about Jacob again, sent them across with everything else that he, Jacob, had. And he, and that's the word, but it's Jacob, right, was alone. And then you have a wow. It's and, or but, or then, a man wrestled with him until the break of day. So he's alone, and out of nowhere, there's this miraculous man that's just there wrestling him down, striving against him. And then things get really confusing. Now, I'm just going to read this as the original text has it, without any interpretation, right? When he saw that he did not prevail against him, he touched his side, and Jacob's side was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, let me go, for the day is broken. He said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And he said to him, what is your name?
My best friend's sister's boyfriend's brother's girlfriend heard from this guy who knows this kid is going with the girl who saw Ferris pass out at 31 Flavors last night.
And he said, Jacob. There we got a hint. Then he said, your name shall no longer be called Deceiver or Jacob. Now we can probably assume that one's God based on the response to what Jacob has just said in the new name. And he says, for you've striven against God. And then there's this part we got to deal with there. Then Jacob asked him, that's probably Jacob asking God, tell me your name. But he said, that's probably God, why is it that you ask my name? And then again, we're back into pronoun land. And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, for I have seen God face to face. So traditionally in all of this, it goes something like this. God shows up and wrestles with Jacob, but God sees that Jacob's just too tough for God to overpower. So God pulls out like his superpower and knocks Jacob's hip out of sort to try to like get a little leg up in the fight. But even then, he can't get Jacob to let go of him. So day comes and God can't be in the daytime because God's a vampire.
It's like diamonds.
I threw up.
So God says, Jacob, let me go. And Jacob says, I'm not going to let you go unless you give me stuff. And since that's how God always wants his faithful children to respond, he says, sure, fine, I'll give you a new name. What's your name? Your name is you beat God up. Israel, you fought against God and you've succeeded. And so you're going to beat men too. Go, Jacob. That's sort of the standard translation. Now,
You must unlearn what you have learned.
why is it normally translated that way? Well, in translation work, you always kind of follow the tradition. I mean, it is important that there is like this history of how we read the text, and this goes way, way back. And so when you depart from that, you're right, you're making stuff up in one sense. And so you got to have really good textual reasons or dogmatic reasons for doing it. Now, the thing is this, where do we get these names from and this placement from? Well, you got to go to the Greek Old Testament, the Septuagint, which is a translation done by intertestamental Judaism. And there you find that things are made a little more clear by the translation itself. In this way, it is the interpretation of the Jewish scribes, the Pharisees, the rabbis, and whatnot that gives us what we now translate the text to mean. And I think it just comes down to us assuming that there isn't another way to do it. And maybe I'm wrong, right? Maybe I'm wrong. This isn't thus saith the Lord, but just follow me with this one. When the pronouns are flying fast and loose like that, without any necessary attached referent, but where the referent could be either one, it all goes back to how you assign that referent to the meaning of the entire text. So here's what I think happened. I think that Jacob was left alone and God, the man, showed up and strove with him, which we could even mean kind of beat him up, until dawn. And when he, Jacob, saw that he did not prevail against God, God, touched Jacob's side. So God is beating Jacob up until Jacob realizes he can't win. And then God just strikes a killing blow.
Finish him!
Now that you understand who I am and who you are, I'm going to crush you. I'm going to crucify you. I'm going to break you so hard that you are going to limp the rest of your life as a result of this meeting me face to face. And Jacob's side was put out of joint as he wrestled with God. Not because Jacob was winning, but because God was forcing Jacob to see that he was losing. He showed him his sin. And then verse 26, this is Jacob said, let me go for day is breaking. I've lost, uncle, right? And God said to Jacob, I will not let you go unless you bless me. Now this is totally reversed, right? In the English, it's totally the opposite way around. It has God saying, let me go, Jacob, and Jacob saying, not unless you bless me. I think this is God saying to Jacob, I'm not going to let you go, even though you want to go meet your brother. I'm not going to let you go unless you confess my name. Bless the Lord, O my soul. Come on, Jacob, you can do it. All that is within you, bless my holy name. Now, here's the one trick. What this means is that the two quotations that happen here, both I will not let you go unless you bless me, and the question, what is your name, are both spoken by the same individual. Now, hat tip to the original rendition, it has them going back and forth the entire time, and at this point, we have to have two in a row. However, in Hebrew, it's not like you can't do that, or it never happens, right? It just isn't the way we've normally translated it. So Jacob says, I'm beat up, let me go. God says, not unless you confess me and have faith in me, so tell me your name, because I'm going to change it. I'm going to change you. I can't let you go until I make you faithful. And so he, which we know is Jacob, said, I'm Jacob. I'm deceiver, right? I'm lying, wretched sinner, poor, miserable sinner. I confess unto you all my sins and iniquities. Yeah? And God said to him, you shall no longer be deceiver. You shall no longer be sinner. You shall no longer be enslaved to death and original darkness, but you shall be named Israel. God fights. Why? Because you have striven and failed against God, but with men you will prevail. Which is not to say he's going to have victory in every moment in his life, but that in that we have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, we are justified by his grace on the last day, so that before the sight of all mankind, we will be declared innocent and clean. It's at this point, after God has said, I am crushing you and I'm not letting you go until you confess who I am, and so that you will do this, I'm going to make you no longer deceiver and make you the one for whom I promise, I swear by my almighty name I'm going to fight for, that Jacob says, so tell me your name. Who are you? And he already knows this is the God of his fathers, but still, who are you? What is your name? And God says, why do you ask my name? Which has some other implications about Jacob still not quite getting it at this point. But the result is what God intended. But now here we have to put our verse breaking at a different point than our sentence structure. Normally, it would read that he, that is God, but it just says he, that he, God, blessed him, Jacob, there. But I think the result of all of this is that he, Jacob, blessed God there. Verse 30, so he called the name of the place God's face. That's it. He's doing it. He's blessing God there as God has made him unto do, by revealing himself to him as the holy and just God who must kill sinners and raise them alive again. So Jacob blessed God at that place and named the name of the place Peniel, saying, I've seen God face to face, which means I should be dead, and yet look, I am alive. And he died and is alive forevermore. I mean, there's all sorts of overshadowing right there as well. So the sun rose up that morning and Jacob limped past the face of God because of the wound with which God had struck him, by which when he comes to Esau and kneels down, Esau, in fact, has compassion on his broken brother. And so the just wrath of the one offended passes over the sinner because of the wound in God fight's side. Okay, so could I be wrong? Yep. Does it fit better with what we actually believe? Yep. Is it grammatically and textually sound? I think so. So anyway, that's the way I read it and that's the way I teach it. Jacob at the Jabbok for the death of the sinner and the life of the justified, hero of the simul justus et peccator. Pretty awesome stuff, and I'll tell you what, it preaches Christ, which is what you got to do with the Old Testament. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Until next time, if you like what we do here at Worldview Everlasting, turning the world on its head with the gospel of Jesus Christ, support what we do. $5 a month goes a long way. Of course, liking and sharing and subscribing to all of our videos and whatnot, or checking out worldvieweverlasting.com for more written answers is always something worth your time. Until next time, I hope to see you in church where you can see the face of God and live in the absolution of the office of the keys and the take, eat of the Lord's Supper, so that on the last day you are prepared, watched, and awakened for the life of the world to come. That is a place in which we will everlastingly rock on.
Finish him!
Oh, come on, bro, what are you doing?